Okay, no rest for the weary. Did an intro video coming right back with the intro. That actually, ooh, that was an interlude, right? No, I'm not sure that's right either. Was it an epistle? Anyway, let's not be so pedantic. Let's just jump right in. So first of all, you should think like, why should you consider writing a book? Hopefully, because you would know that you have a strong ability to articulate in your native tongue in the written form, okay? Because, and again, this is focused towards, yes, anyone can get published. You can pay money and someone will publish you just writing a bunch of random stuff on paper. So anybody can get published, but this is talking about how to become a published author from traditional known publishers that will market your work around the world and that you do not pay them, okay? You send a manuscript, they review it, they accept it, you get a contract. It's a legitimate operation. So that's what I'm going to be focused on, and that's what I'm going to be talking about in this series of videos. So first and foremost, you should know that you're a strong writer. I only considered writing as an option once my love was taken from me and thrown into the dungeons of Thailand, because during the course of my international travels, while I was living in all of these different countries, my grandmother, Gringy, love her to death, and my grandfather, Pa, passed away now. What I would do is I would write to them. I would write to them from these different places, like Micronesia, when I was living at a monastery in the mountains of Nepal, right? Little beach towns in Thailand. I would write to them these letters of where I was and the scenery and little incidental things that happened between observations or between myself and people. And so what happened was I started to get feedback from family members that they would send them on to, saying like, wow, you should write a book. You should write a book. You should write a book, blah, 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 blah. And so anyway, that's why, when all this catastrophe stuff happened, it was like one of the strategies for me to be able to conquer, right, my mountain was, let me write some books. Because if I can write some books, then again, every book can be dedicated to Ashley. Every single book that is sold is more resources, more publicity. If there's enough books sold, they go onto best-selling lists. When they're on the selling list, they're like, why is this book written? They hear about Ashley, and then she can finally be saved. So that's what's going on with me. But I want to focus on what's going on with you. So assuming that you know you're a strong writer, the next thing you need to do is figure out what you're going to be writing about. What's your genre? So there's really popular genres that are probably easier to get into, but also they're going to be I slowed down because there's this thing that popped in my head that I'll talk about in a minute. Let me make a note and just say AI. But nevertheless, kids and romance, right? Those are really big sellers. So kids books and romance, right? Because parents love buying books for their kids, and so there's always like and kids like they want to have new books, and so there's a big constant turnover, and it's the same with the romance novels. It's the same. It's like, hey, I want to hear another one, another one, another one, another one. So there's a big market for certain genres. And so, depending on what your reason is for doing this, which, well, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but this is just more extrapolation, you may or may not resonate with that specifically. But nevertheless, if you go into a broad category that has a lot of revenue, then you may have an easier time of finding a publisher than a person that is doing something very niche. So the more niche you are, sort of the smaller audience, and then the better your work is going to have to be to really be clearly above the competition, so that the agents or the publishers that are directed towards that smaller audience are going to take you on. So for my novel is historical fiction, which is niche, but it's not super niche. It's like a little bit niche. There's still a lot of historical fiction that gets written and read, and I've read a lot of historical fiction, and some of it is terrible, right? And some of it is amazing. So terrible would be like those, I don't want to say, but I really like the Aubrey Maturin series by Patrick O'Brien, historical fiction. Those are just really amazing. Those are really great. But anyway, so that's what I did mine in. And so, great. Oh, before I continue, let me talk about AI. Yeah, so it's going to get tricky, guys, because already things like Auto GTP and Chat GTP and these new protocols and apps, software, things that are coming out that utilize artificial intelligence, they are pretty much already able to produce works at the level of good authors, and it's only going to continue to improve. And no one's really sure what's going. I mean, there's already, right, a publisher that's publishing some guy that put in a prompt into AI, and the AI spat a book out. Okay, so that's already happening right now. It's a children's book, but nevertheless, it's not going to be too much longer before they can do that with books like War and Peace and just start spitting out classics. So that's something to consider. No one's really sure what's going to happen, but I think what we can be sure of is that there's going to be big pushback. And so, I myself, I never want to read novels that are generated by AI. To me, that just seems like putting chains on myself. To me, now maybe you would be interested in that, and so there's going to be that's going to be a whole. And so for some of you forward thinkers, that's going to be a thing. It's going to be a thing. Now a lot of people are going to hate you for it, but a lot of people are going to love it. So, if you want to start publishing, then there's an easy way for you to get into it. It's a whole new genre that's coming up. AI books, right? Robot books, books written by AI with humans or blah, 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 blah. You could do all this different stuff with it. So that's the thing. I'm not going to do it, but that's something that you could do. But nevertheless, and people are going to hate me for saying that, but I mean, hey, you can't stop technology. You can keep making candles. When the light bulbs are coming, people are always going to use candles, but you can't prevent the light bulb from coming because you want to keep making candles. You have to learn how to adapt with the technology and utilize the technology. I don't like it any more than you do. I'm just being real that people are going to be producing novels and books and all sorts of literature using AI either completely or partially, and so there's going to be a huge market in that. And so, hey, there it is, right? Rent's not free. We live in a world, unfortunately, that's driven by capitalistic tendencies, and so if that is at the end of the day what some person needs to do in order to prevent themselves from this is getting dark, homeless, blah blah blah. Let's go back on track. So yeah, AI. Not really sure what's going to happen, but it is going to be another competitor, and so it's something that you should probably consider at least in some regard as far as how it will affect you or how you can utilize it or whatever. I certainly did not utilize any AI for my stuff. It wasn't available really when I was doing my current things that are coming out now. But I honestly don't feel the need to rely on AI. I think that personally, one of my best skills that was given to me by the universe was communicating in written English. So I don't need for AI to help me. But nevertheless, ways of writing. So let's go into some ways of writing. So I've done 2 books. One is starting the process of going to the publishers, to the agents, and one is already on pre-release. And I did completely different, I sort of did completely different ways of writing for each of them. And so I think that there's probably maybe more, but the ways that I see, the ways that have worked for me to produce 2 works are as follows. The first is sort of where you go sentence by sentence. And so in both of my books, I had a plot. I had pretty much a whole plot before I started writing, right? Now, for my first book, which was only 76,000 words, right? 240 pages or so, I had 10 pages of notes. It just came to me one morning. I don't know why, I can't explain it. It was when Ashley was in her trial. It's just an epiphany. It was just like I woke up and this story just came into my head about a little shepherd boy, and I just furiously stood there for an hour writing, and at the end of it, I had the bones of what was then turned into that 10 pages, then became a 240-page novel. And so how I wrote that novel then is I had that 10 pages, right? But that's nothing, right? That's like maybe a few main characters and an overarching scheme, a synopsis. It's nothing. So then from that, I would start to build up. And when I say build up, I mean that I would go sentence by sentence. That's how I wrote the book. Very meticulous, very slow, very methodical, extremely detailed, just nick a little bit each day. Some days I would get half a page, some days I'd get one. Some days when I was on a roll, I could get 2 or 3 pages. And if you think about it, it doesn't take a whole lot of days if you're doing 2 or 3 pages or even 1 page to make a book, right? 1 page a day will get you a book a year. a pretty decent sized book, 365 pages. And so that's a big thing that I'll talk about is consistency in writing and things like that. But as far as the way that you can write the story is you can sort of do it that way where you just build. You just build on meticulously. And so that, editing is your constant friend. Editing is 30, 40, 50 times the same paragraph, edit, reword, come back to it a day later, come back to it a few days later, read it, make sure that it flows off the tongue, make sure that it sounds sonorous, that it's perfect, voluptuous. And if it isn't, then make it that way. That was how the first book was. It's like just, okay, now if you read it, I do believe it reads just like so smoothly. But to write it, it took a great deal of time and meticulous effort. And so that is how one strategy that you can do. And again, my thing is quality. I want to make quality books that are going to be remembered for a long time, centuries, hopefully at least. And also, by making such good books, I'll be able to more easily accomplish my aim of helping Ashley, www.freeashley.org. And so that is why I sort of utilized that manner for writing my first book, The Shepherd, A Bronze Age Tale. For the second book, which was much bigger, a nonfiction, actually about the dark web drug dealing and living in paradise and traveling the world and Ashley and the prison and the war in Ukraine and just all this crazy stuff, right? So with that one, I started the same as The Shepherd. For like the first half of the book, I was very just like that. And then what I did, because it was different, I sort of obviously knew a lot more of what was going to happen because it's nonfiction, right? So at that point, and one of the ways that you can write is just sort of writing through. Once I got to the part four of the book, at that point, full steam ahead. I just wrote it. I just wrote the book. Some days I would write 10 pages and I would not go back and review. I wouldn't go back and re-edit. I would just keep pushing. Some days, like, it's not like I would just and I'm not even looking, right? Like, yeah, I would look and make sure that it's like not terrible, but then, and of course by me writing a whole novel and getting it published first, like, and having years and years of writing experience just through school and through writing love notes to girls and emails to people and letters to my family from travels, is, it's clear, like, oh, that's terrible, like, let me just fix this and fix that. But very quick though, not like I'm going 30, 40, 50 times to review the same sentence like I was doing before. And so it just went all the way through, and then once it was done, then you basically have a rough draft book, right? So then at that time, it's like, okay, you gotta have this, but then you have to go back, and then you have to, you still have to edit it like crazy. And so I think personally that doing it the stream of conscious way, where you just sort of write through and then come back and try to edit and edit and edit, I think it's never going to be, at least for me, it's never going to allow for the same manner of precision that is possible by doing something word by word. But at the same time, it really depends on your book, your scope, and your subject. The Shepherd is a much smaller book, very compact. And I wanted it to be written differently. Whereas this nonfiction, much bigger effort, I wanted it to be more, I don't want to say accessible, because again, sometimes you can choose to use a lot of lexicons and vernacular and phrases that people aren't so familiar with these days through our common tongue. And so that's much more like The Shepherd, very like high prose. Whereas stream of conscious, knowing that I wanted it to be like accessible to the whole world, it's not so important that everything is not like a, just surgical, right? It's still great. I mean, the story is phenomenal, right? When it comes out, you'll know about it, but it's just different, right? Every book is different. And so when I continue to do The Shepherd as part of a series, right? So every book that I do in that series, I will write exactly the same. And you should too, right? If you're going to start a series, don't write the first book like this and then try and do something completely different the second, because then it's just not going to mesh. It's like, it's probably, maybe it will, but again, if the person really liked the first book, they probably liked it because of the way it was presented and the story, right? It's not just a one and done thing. So that would be one thing to consider. Another thing to consider is your time. You really have to be consistent. For me, everyone is different. Some people, they write best. There's a guy in Bali. I'm not going to name drop him. Super famous nonfiction. One of his surfing book is still like, I think one of the most bought in the whole world. Super cool guy. Lives in this dope compound in Bali. And he doesn't anymore. He's retired. He's just chilling. He's got a really cool compound, really dope, really big, lots of buildings, just gorgeous little Garden of Eden. But when he did write, he would always write at night. He would write at night. Whereas me, personally, I can't write at night because my brain's too tired and it's not able to make that magic happen, to really just meld the words together in a way that makes something really meaningful and worthwhile. And so for me, personally, I always write as soon as I wake up. And so I would always wake up really early. So my life is different than your life is going to be. Everyone's life is different, but there's really specific reasons why I've done the things that I've done, the way that I've done them. I've been charging forward at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And so for me to fit everything into the day, I had to wake up at like 4 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, and then I would start writing, and then I would write until 8 or sometimes 9. Because in those 3-4 hours, that 3-4 hour window, like when I first wake up, when it's still dark and when the world's still sleeping and my brain hasn't started considering all of the different things of the day, I'm just able to write. I'm able to just zone into the story and just myself with the paper. And here's a secret. Ooh, I'll tell you a secret. Now, I don't want to cause any trouble. It shouldn't cause any trouble. But anyway, weed, marijuana, for me, huge help. Now, I'm not going to say it's like a huge help, like I can't write without it. But what the weed helps me with, so what I'll usually do is I'll write. And then when I think it's like done, when I think like, okay, it's done, then what I'll do is I'll smoke a little weed before I start to do anything. Now, you don't get baked, because if you get too stoned, then you just like, you can't, then you went too far, right? But if you just take like, everyone's tolerance is different, but you just get that like that weed buzz. And again, it's different for me. I started smoking when I was 10 years old. Yeah. So, for you, it might just be undoable. But for me, probably because starting weed at 10 years old, my brain just developed with it. It's like they're like symbiotic by this point. For me, that little bit of weed just elevates that creativity to the next level and allows for me to just take what was already considered to be done and polish it even further and make it just like superb, exquisite. So I would certainly recommend that you find a time in the day when you're able to have quiet and focus. And, if you're like me, maybe a little bit of weed. And then that is the space that you need at least 2 hours. You need to have at least 2 hours because, you have to have time to just get in. And then the edit, it's a time, it's a process thing. 30 minutes isn't enough, okay? An hour is just not enough. You're not going to get anything done. You have to have time to get into the story, to feel these characters, to live them, to have their conversations going on, to put yourself in their shoes, to be there. And all you're doing at that point is you're just typing what's happening. You're just the observer. You're right there. That's how I do it, right? I'm right there, but it's like they can't see me. And so I'm just like, slow down, guys. Like, oh goodness, And then of course you have to go back, right? Because you want it, when it's written, you want it to be perfect. So everyone is different, but I know that my quality of writing is much better if I write in those early morning hours than if I sit there and try and come in at like 6 p.m. and say, oh, I feel like, what am I going to do right now? Oh, let me try and write some. Is it a complete waste of time? No. But am I going to keep most of it? Probably not. It's probably mostly going to end up in the trash or, delete button. So that's something to consider, is that you may want to have early morning or night or whatever your time of day is, but you'll probably want to find a time of the day that you can write and be consistent in that so that your brain will sort of come to expect and come to just respond to that stimuli of, oh, now it's time to write. Now it's time to write. That's how it would be for me. Obviously, maybe not the first few days or the first week, but that's how it was for me. And because of my situation specifically, obviously trying to save the woman I love from a lifetime in Thai prison, that's kind of like an incredible motivation that never ever goes away. My gosh, it never goes away. Now, I certainly am not wishing for you to have any sort of motivation near to that, but you do need to have the sort of motivation that's going to allow you to be consistent in that every day or like 6 days out of the week, you're writing and you're putting in those hours into producing something that's worthwhile. Because again, anyone can get published, but if you want to get published by a traditional publisher, then your shit has to be really good. That's it. I'm sorry. Or you have to be famous. Because if you're famous, you can just write whatever shit you want. You don't even write it. There's a ghostwriter. He gets paid. You just sit there doing whatever you're doing as a rich person and tell them stories, and that ghostwriter, he makes the story and they put your name on it and voila. But if that's not your, cup of tea, or that's not really like a short-term possibility, and you want to be published traditionally, then you have to be really, really good. And to be really, really good, you need to put a lot of time, effort, practice, and consistency into that. And you need to not be tripe, right? I mean, if you do what everyone else does, then you're going to get the same results. So you need to have something that stands out, whether it's your story, your plot, right? Something that's going to make you stand out. Because if you spend all this time, right, writing this great book, if it's good enough, you're going to make it. If it's good enough, you're going to make it. But if it's just as good and there's nothing else tangible to sell, if you don't have a big social media audience, if you're not famous, if you're not in some like high place, if there's not some backstory behind you, again, international drug trafficker, lived all around the world, fought in Ukraine, just lived on a sailboat, Micronesia, Thailand, lived with the monks, and like all this stuff, right? So there's a lot of tangibles that I can sell. And also because I've been to so many different places, there's a lot of different places where I can still network and link to. And so have that sort of global audience that's already been developed over time, right? So if you're just run of the mill, living small town, just writing away, and you might find that it's going to be much more difficult in an already very saturated and very difficult environment to find that your stuff is able to stand out. So that's just me being real. I'm always going to keep it real, even if you don't like it. Sorry, because that is just probably going to help you instead of leading you astray, as many people would probably do, because they'll tell you what you want to hear instead of the actual situation. And I'm getting published currently and actually in the process of having a second book go through this, so it's very current for me and I'm very aware. And yes, I've had to send lots of queries, and yes, we'll go into all of this stuff about what to do, blah, 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 blah. All of this is just an introduction video, but we'll get into all of it. And so that is pretty much, I think, enough for an introduction on how to write novels and become a published author. We're going to talk about it. We're going to go into lots of details. This was just sort of an overarching theme, but we'll go into a lot more nitty-gritty details to give you a sort of a roadmap to take. But again, right, like this can be for someone that's young, maybe that wants to be an author in the future. But just be aware that if you are really considering, like, I want to be a published author traditionally, you need to be really strong at writing in your fluent language. You need to be able to do it beautifully, okay? Because otherwise, you're not going to be able to find a traditional publisher unless you're one of those other things that I said before. Great backstory, you're in some kind of high position, you're famous, yada, 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 okay? Otherwise, you're going to have to do indie or self-publishing, which you can still make a lot of money. You can build a big audience. We will talk about all that stuff, but at the beginning, sort of my adventure, at least, will be about the traditional mode, and then I do see There's so much to talk about, so I'm just going to stop there. Please subscribe to this channel. We have a lot of other channels with a lot of crazy content: international drug trafficking, being a mercenary in Ukraine, setting up businesses and living abroad. Like, there's all these different channels on this same channel. Sorry, all these different podcasts on this channel. So make sure that you check them out, that you subscribe, because this entire endeavor is built around providing you cool, interesting content so that we can build a global audience that can be utilized to bring the resources and publicity required to bring Miss Ashley Oosthuizen free from the Thai prison cell that she's been languishing in for almost 4 years. That is why I'm here. That is why I've gone all around the world and done all of these things. And that is why I'm sitting, and that's why I wrote the book. That's why I got published. That's why I continue to do everything. And that's why I'm sitting here speaking to you and I'm sharing my knowledge so that you can become stronger. And so help me while I help you, while we help Ashley, by subscribing, becoming a member. And that's really it. And I'm just going to keep making cool videos. And so I hope you guys enjoy, and leave some comments, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.